There is one thing I am certain of, though. With all the Michelangelos, the Raphaels, the Guidos, and the other old masters, the sublime history of Rome remains unpainted. They painted virgins enough, and popes enough, and saintly scarecrows enough to people paradise, almost, and these things are all they did paint. Nero fiddling or burning Rome, the assassination of Caesar, the stirring spectacle of 100,000 people bending forward with rapt interest in the Colosseum to see two skillful gladiators hacking away each other's lives. A tiger springing upon a kneeling martyr. These and 1,000 other matters, which we read of with a living interest, must be sought for only in books, not among the rubbish left by the old masters, who are no more. I have the satisfaction of informing the public. At Pompeii. Everywhere you see things that make you wonder how old these old houses were before the night of destruction came. Things, too, which bring back those long-dead inhabitants and place them living before your eyes. For instance, the steps, 2 feet thick lava blocks, that lead up out of the school, and the same kind of steps that lead up into the dress circle of the principal theater, are almost worn through. For ages the boys hurried out of that school, and for ages their parents hurried into that theater, and the nervous feet that have been dust and ashes for 18 centuries have left their record for us to read today. I imagined I could see crowds of gentlemen and ladies thronging into the theater, with tickets for secured seats in their hands, and on the wall I read the imaginary placard in infamous grammar, "Positively no free list, except members of the press." Hanging about the doorway, I fancied, were slouchy Pompeian street boys, uttering slang and profanity, and keeping a wary eye out for checks. I entered the theater and sat in one of the long rows of stone benches in the dress circle and looked at the place for the orchestra, and the ruined stage, and around at the wide sweep of empty boxes, and thought to myself, this house won't pay. I tried to imagine the music in full blast, the leader of the orchestra beating time, and the versatile so-and-so, who had just returned from a most successful tour in the provinces to play his last and farewell engagement of positively 6 nights only in Pompeii, previous to his departure for Herculaneum, charging around the stage and piling the agony mountains high. But I could not do it with such a house as that. Those empty benches tied my fancy down to dull reality. I said, these people that ought to be here have been dead and still, and mouldering to dust for ages and ages, and will never care for the trifles and follies of life any more forever, owing to circumstances, etc., etc. There will not be any performance tonight. Close down the curtains. Put out the lights. Fame. After browsing among the stately ruins of Rome, of Baia, of Pompeii, and after glancing down the long marble ranks of battered and nameless imperial heads that stretch down the corridors of the Vatican, one thing strikes me with a force it never had before: the unsubstantial, unlasting character of fame. Men lived long lives in the olden time, and struggled feverishly through them, toiling like slaves, in oratory, in generalship, or in literature, and then laid them down and died, happy in the possession of an enduring history and a deathless name. Well, 20 little centuries flutter away, and what is left of these things? A crazy inscription on a block of stone, which snuffy antiquarians bother over and tangle up and make nothing out of but a bare name, which they spell wrong. No history, no tradition, no poetry, nothing that can give it even a passing interest. What may be left of General Grant's great name 40 centuries hence? This, in the encyclopedia for AD 5868, possibly. Uriah S. or Z. Grant, popular poet of ancient times in the Aztec provinces of the United States of British America. Some authors say flourished about AD 742, but the learned Fufu states that he was a contemporary of Shakespeare, the English poet, and flourished about AD 1328, some 3 centuries after the Trojan War, instead of before it. He wrote, "Rock me to sleep, mother. These thoughts sadden me. I will to bed." Athens from the Acropolis. The full moon was riding high in the cloudless heavens now. We sauntered carelessly and unthinkingly to the edge of the lofty battlements of the citadel, and looked down. A vision, and such a vision. Athens by moonlight. The prophet that thought the splendors of the New Jerusalem were revealed to him surely saw this instead. It lay in the level plain right under our feet, all spread abroad like a picture, and we looked down upon it as we might have looked from a balloon. We saw no semblance of a street, but every house, every window, every clinging vine, every projection was as distinct and sharply marked as if the time were noonday, and yet there was no glare, no glitter, nothing harsh or repulsive. The noiseless city was flooded with the mellowest light that ever streamed from the moon, and seemed like some living creature wrapped in peaceful slumber. On its further side was a little temple, whose delicate pillars and ornate front glowed with a rich luster that chained the eye like the spell, and nearer by, the palace of the king reared its creamy walls out of the midst of a great garden of shrubbery that was flecked all over with a random shower of amber lights, a spray of golden sparks that lost their brightness in the glory of the moon, and glinted softly upon the sea of dark foliage like the pallid stars of the Milky Way. Overhead the stately columns, majestic still in their ruin, underfoot the dreaming city. In the distance the silver sea. Not on the broad earth is there another picture half so beautiful. As we turned and moved through the temple, I wished that the illustrious men who had sat in it in the remote ages could visit it again and reveal themselves to our curious eyes. Plato, Aristotle, Demosthenes, Socrates, Phocion, Pythagoras, Euclid, Pindar, Xenophon, Herodotus, Praxiteles, and Phidias, Zeuxis the painter. What a constellation of celebrated names! But more than all, I wished that old Diogenes, groping so patiently with his lantern, searching so zealously for one solitary honest man in all the world, might meander along and stumble on our party. I ought not to say it, maybe, but still I suppose he would have put out his light. Constantinople. Commercial morals, especially, are bad. There is no gainsaying that. Greek, Turkish, and Armenian morals consist only in attending church regularly on the appointed Sabbaths, and in breaking the 10 Commandments all the balance of the week. It comes natural to them to lie and cheat in the first place, and then they go on and improve on nature until they arrive at perfection. In recommending his son to a merchant as a valuable salesman, A father does not say he is a nice, moral, upright boy and goes to Sunday school and is honest, but he says, "This boy is worth his weight in broad pieces of 100. For behold, he will cheat whomsoever hath dealings with him. And from the Euxine to the waters of Marmora, there abideth not so gifted a liar." How is that for a recommendation? The missionaries tell me that they hear encomiums like that passed upon people every day. They say of a person they admire, "Ah, he is a charming swindler and a most exquisite liar." Turkish journalism. The newspaper business has its inconveniences in Constantinople. 2 Greek papers and 1 French one were suppressed here within a few days of each other. No victories of the Cretans are allowed to be printed. From time to time, the Grand Vizier sends a notice to the various editors that the Cretan insurrection is entirely suppressed, and although that editor knows better, he still has to print the notice. The Levant Herald is too fond of speaking praisefully of Americans to be popular with the Sultan, who does not relish our sympathy with the Cretans, and therefore that paper has to be particularly circumspect in order to keep out of trouble. Once the editor, forgetting the official notice in his paper that the Cretans were crushed out, printed a letter of a very different tenor from the American consul in Crete and was fined $250 for it. Shortly, he printed another from the same source and was imprisoned 3 months for his pains. I think I could get the assistant editorship of the Levant Herald, but I am going to try to worry along without it.